An elderly man left his German Shepherd K9 in the snow. What a 6-year-old girl did next touched everyone who saw it. He had been through war zones, saved lives, and stood fearless in the face of danger, but nothing could prepare him for this. A bitter, silent winter morning when the one he trusted most opened the back door, whispered goodbye, and left him in the snow. The German shepherd didn't understand. His breath froze in the cold air. His paws trembled, but he waited, hoping someone would come back for him. Inside the house, a 6-year-old girl pressed her face against the window, watching her best friend disappear into the white. She didn't know what was happening, only that it felt wrong. What she did next, with her tiny hands and brave little heart, would move everyone who witnessed it. Her innocence, her instinct to protect, and her unwavering love would start a chain of events that no one could have expected. Before we dive into this emotional story, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful story of loyalty, love, and second chances. The snow had started falling early that morning. Thick, soft flakes drifted silently through the gray sky, covering the small suburban neighborhood in a blanket of white. Everything looked peaceful and still, but in one backyard, something wasn't right. A German shepherd stood at the edge of a porch, his breath fogging in the cold air. His dark eyes were fixed on the back door that had just closed behind him. His name was Ranger. He had once worn a vest with the word K9 across it. He had served in the police force with fierce loyalty, strength, and discipline. He was protector, a soldier, but now his body ached from years of service. His legs didn't run like they used to, and his eyes, once sharp and fearless, now carried the weight of confusion. Inside the house, the man he had served and lived with, Edward, a retired officer in his late 70s, leaned against the door. His hand trembled on the knob. His breathing was uneven, and his eyes were filled with something that looked like guilt and fear. "I can't do this anymore, buddy," Edward whispered, barely audible even to himself. "I can't afford your food. I can't afford the meds. You deserve better than this. Maybe someone will find you, someone who still can." Then he walked away. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just sat down slowly, the snow starting to gather on his fur. His ears twitched at every sound, but the one he waited for, the door creaking open again, never came. From the second-floor window, a small face was pressed against the glass. Her breath left soft clouds on the frosty pane. Her name was Lily, and she was 6 years old. Her blonde hair was tangled from sleep. Her pajama sleeves were too long for her arms, but her wide blue eyes didn't blink. She had seen everything. Ranger was more than just a dog to her. He was her bedtime guardian, her shadow in the backyard, her quiet listener when her parents argued downstairs. He was the one who curled up next to her when she had nightmares. The only one who never raised his voice, never left. Lily's tiny hand reached up to unlatch the window, but it was frozen shut. She tried again, harder, until her fingers hurt. She turned and ran barefoot through the hallway, down the creaky wooden stairs. Her voice called softly at first, then louder. "Daddy, Daddy, why is Ranger outside?" Edward was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of cold coffee. He didn't answer. The old man looked like he hadn't slept in days. There were bags under his eyes and deep lines carved into his face, like sorrow etched in stone. Lily's small feet patted across the cold tile. She reached for the back door, her fingers trembling. "No," Edward said suddenly, his voice low. "Leave him be." "But he's cold," Lily pleaded, looking up at her father. "He's crying, Daddy." Edward shook his head, staring past her. "I did what I had to." Outside, the snow fell heavier now. Ranger had curled into himself, trying to keep his paws warm beneath him. But he didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just waited. Lily made a decision. She grabbed her pink raincoat from the rack. It was too thin for the weather, but it was all she could find. Then she pulled on her red boots, mismatched and muddy, and slipped outside without another word. The cold hit her like a wall. Her cheeks stung. Her nose turned red. But she didn't stop. She trudged through the snow toward Ranger, her arms wrapped tight around her little body. When she reached him, he lifted his head slowly. His ears perked up just slightly. Lily didn't hesitate. She dropped to her knees beside him and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not leaving you." The scene was quiet, but something about it, this tiny girl in the snow, holding an old dog who had been cast aside, felt loud, as if the world should have been watching. And soon it would be, because what Lily did next would ripple far beyond that backyard. But in that moment, all that mattered was that Ranger wasn't alone. He had someone small but powerful in love, and she wasn't going anywhere. The snow kept falling. Lily's arms were wrapped tightly around Ranger. Her breath warmed the fur on his neck as she held him close. The snowflakes melted on her cheeks and eyelashes, but she didn't notice. All she knew was that Ranger was cold and scared, and that someone had to stay. Inside the house, Edward sat frozen at the table. The silence was deafening. For a long time, he didn't move, not even when he heard the faint creak of the back door opening, not even when the wind whistled through the gap. He didn't want to see her face, didn't want to see those blue eyes looking at him like he was the villain. But Lily wasn't coming back inside. Not yet. Outside, the snow was up to her knees. Her red boots were soaked through. She leaned into Ranger's side, whispering soft words like secrets into his ear. "You're not alone," she said again. "I'm here. I'm your person now." Ranger shifted just slightly, lifting his head and nudging it into her lap. It was the first time he had moved in nearly an hour. The trust in that small gesture broke something open in Lily's heart. She stood up slowly, brushing snow off her coat. Then she looked toward the house. Her father had left the door unlocked. She pushed it open, stepped inside just for a moment, and returned with her favorite blanket. It was old, with pictures of flying horses stitched across it, but it was warm. She wrapped it carefully around Ranger, tucking it under his paws like she'd seen her mom do with her at bedtime. The sight of it all, this little girl kneeling in the snow, wrapping a blanket around forgotten dog, would later become a photograph shared across thousands of phones. The image that brought people to tears. But right now, no one else saw it. No one but Edward, who had finally stood and walked to the door. He watched in silence, hand pressed against the glass. Lily didn't know he was there. She had curled up next to Ranger, her small body leaning into his for warmth. She was humming softly, a song she had made up herself. Something about stars and being brave and never leaving your friend behind. "Edward," he heard her call softly, but her voice was quiet. "He's cold, Daddy," she said simply. "He needs me." Edward opened the door wider. The cold rushed in. He stepped out, his old bones aching with every move, and walked slowly to them, as if approaching a wild animal. When he reached them, he crouched down, knees stiff and painful, and placed a hand on Ranger's back. The dog looked up at him, confused. Edward swallowed hard. "I didn't know what else to do," he whispered. "I thought maybe letting him go was the kindest thing, but maybe I was wrong." Lily looked up at her father, her voice small but firm. "He's family." Edward nodded slowly, then lowered himself to sit in the snow beside them. For the first time in years, he let his hand rest on Ranger's chest, feeling the slow, steady beat of heart that had given so much and asked for nothing in return. They sat like that for a long time, an old man, a young girl, and a dog with a warrior's heart, wrapped in silence and snow. The world had gone still, as if it, too, was watching. And inside, Edward's heart began to thaw. He looked at his daughter, then at the old dog who had once saved his life more than once. "We'll figure it out," he said finally. "We'll keep him warm. We'll take care of him together." Lily smiled softly, leaning her head against Ranger's neck. And just like that, a promise was made in the cold. That night, the house was quieter than usual. The heater rattled in the hallway, trying its best to fight off the winter chill. Edward sat on the living room couch, staring at the flickering light of the television. Though the volume was low, and he wasn't really watching, his thoughts were somewhere else, somewhere deeper. Ranger lay beside the couch, wrapped in Lily's blanket. His body twitched slightly in his sleep. Even resting, the dog's breathing was shallow and uneven. The snow hadn't done him any favors. Edward knew that. He knew how dangerous cold like that could be for an old body canine or human. And still he had done it. Lily was curled up on the floor next to Ranger, her hand resting gently on his paw. She hadn't left his side since the afternoon, not even for dinner. Edward had tried to get her to eat, but she had only shaken her head. "He didn't eat," she said, "so I won't either." Edward sighed and rubbed his tired eyes. How had he gotten here? A lifetime of discipline, medals, and training. And now, he was a man who had nearly let his best friend freeze to death in the backyard, not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. The truth was, he had nothing left. The pension barely covered the mortgage. His arthritis made it almost impossible to pick up part-time work. Ranger's medications cost more than the groceries some weeks. And the thought of watching the dog suffer, of seeing him grow weaker and slower, had been too much. But he hadn't counted on Lily, the girl who had more heart in her 6-year-old body than most adults he'd ever met. She had changed something in him in just one afternoon. Simply by refusing to give up, a soft knock at the door made him sit up straight. It was nearly 9 p.m. Who could be out in weather like this? Edward opened the door to find his next-door neighbor, Claire, bundled in a thick coat, holding a bottle and a thermos. She looked surprised to see him. "I saw the lights on," she said, brushing snow off her shoulders. "And I saw Lily outside earlier in the snow with the dog. Is everything okay?" Edward hesitated. "Not really," he admitted. Claire stepped inside without waiting for permission. She had lived on that street for nearly 15 years. She brought over casseroles when Lily's mother passed, had helped carry Edward's groceries more times than he could count. She wasn't nosy, just kind the way people used to be before the world got too busy. She knelt beside Ranger and looked at him closely. "He's freezing," she said softly, "and he looks sick." "He is," Edward replied. "Old bones, bad hips. He was a working dog before we adopted him after my last unit retired him." Claire looked up. "You were going to let him go." Edward nodded once. Shame washed over him like cold water. "I thought maybe someone would take him," he whispered. "Someone who could afford him. But that was foolish. He wouldn't have gone anywhere. He would have waited until he died out there." Claire finished his thought gently. "He would have waited until he died." Edward didn't speak. Claire turned back to Ranger and reached into her bag, pulling out a small bottle and a wrapped sandwich. "This is the pain medication I used for my Labrador before he passed last year," she said. "You can have it. And this sandwich. Lily needs to eat something. She's not as strong as she thinks." Edward took the items, his hands shaking slightly. "Thank you," he murmured. Claire stood up and placed a hand on his arm. "You're not alone, Ed. You're just tired. But that girl of yours, she reminded the whole neighborhood today what love really looks like." He nodded, eyes stinging. "She saved him. She saved you both." Later that night, Edward sat on the floor with Lily, helping her feed Ranger the pieces of the sandwich, gently coaxing the old dog to eat. Ranger's eyes, tired but full of trust, flickered between them. Edward rested a hand on Lily's shoulder. "You were right," he said quietly. "He's family, and we take care of family no matter how hard it gets." Lily looked up at her father with tired eyes. "You promise?" Edward nodded slowly. "I promise." And for the first time in weeks, he meant it. The morning after was brutal. A sharp wind howled down the narrow street like a warning, tossing snow across driveways and piling drifts along fences. Inside the small house, it was just as cold. The furnace had sputtered through the night and finally given up around dawn. The old system couldn't keep up with the storm. Edward sat, wrapped in his coat, at the kitchen table, staring at the thermostat like it had personally betrayed him. Lily was still asleep on the living room rug, curled beside Ranger, who had barely moved since the night before. Edward had thought maybe, just maybe, the sandwich, the blanket, and the medication from Claire would be enough, a small boost to help Ranger hold on a little longer. But now, seeing the dog's labored breathing and the way his body trembled even under layers of warmth, he knew it wasn't. He was out of time. Ranger, Edward knelt beside him, placing a hand gently on his fur. The dog didn't even lift his head. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, just long enough to acknowledge the voice, then closed again. Lily stirred, blinking sleep from her eyes. Is he okay? She asked, sitting up. Edward hesitated. No, he said honestly. He needs help. Lily's face tightened. We have to take him to the doctor like when I was sick. Edward's chest tightened. Dogs don't have doctors like people do, sweetie. They have vets. Then let's go. He looked at her. This tiny girl in a princess nightgown with tangled hair, so much courage in her voice it made him ache. I don't have the money for that, Lily, he said. She didn't blink. But you have the truck. We can ask for help. People help when someone is hurting, like Claire did. She was right. And somehow, her belief in the world, her belief that people still cared, was stronger than his doubt. He stood up and grabbed his coat. Help me wrap him in the blanket again. We'll take him to the vet. They worked together, slow, careful, gentle. Edward carried Ranger to the truck, his old arms trembling under the weight. He laid him in the back seat while Lily sat close, holding his paw. The drive through town was treacherous. Snowbanks made the roads look unfamiliar, and Edward had to grip the wheel with both hands. The heater in the truck barely worked, but Lily kept whispering to Ranger, rubbing his ears. She refused to let him slip away. They reached a small veterinary clinic on Main Street, just as the storm began to ease. Edward parked, ran inside, and begged for help. At first, the receptionist shook her head. We're short-staffed today, and emergency visits cost. He's a retired K-9. Edward cut in, his voice cracking. He served, he protected people, he saved lives. Please, from behind the desk, a tall woman in scrubs stepped out. She had dark curls tucked into a bun and a no-nonsense look in her eyes. Bring him in, she said. We'll figure out the cost later. Edward didn't even thank her. He just ran inside the clinic. Ranger was placed on a heated table, hooked up to 4 fluids. The vet, Dr. Rivera, worked quickly and calmly. She listened to his chest, checked his joints, and took his temperature. Lily sat in the corner, watching every movement, holding a crayon drawing she had made of Ranger the night before. Is he going to be okay? She asked quietly. Dr. Rivera turned her face, softening. He's very sick. The cold put too much strain on his heart and lungs, and he's old. But he's strong, sweetheart, stronger than most. Lily nodded, eyes wide. He saved people. He was a hero. Dr. Rivera smiled gently. Well, maybe it's time someone saved him. Edward stood silently in the doorway, guilt pressing on him like weight. But as he looked at Lily standing by Ranger's side like a soldier herself, he realized something. This wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about saving what they had left, each other. By the next morning, the snow had slowed, leaving behind a sparkling white coat over the town. The streets were still quiet, but inside the small veterinary clinic, something had changed. Ranger was still lying on the heated table, weak but alive. His breathing had stabilized during the night, thanks to fluids, warmth, and gentle care. Dr. Rivera had stayed longer than her shift, checking his vitals every hour. She wasn't just treating a dog. She was guarding a bond. She could feel the moment Lily stepped through her doors. Lily hadn't left Ranger's side. She'd slept curled up on a chair, clutching her drawing of him like a security blanket. Her hair was messy, her eyes heavy with worry, but her presence was unwavering. When she opened her eyes that morning and saw Ranger breathing, really breathing, she smiled for the first time in days. Edward sat in the waiting area, holding a cup of black coffee someone had brought him. He felt like a stranger in his own skin. The man who had nearly given up was now clinging to Hope, and Hope had a 6-year-old name. Then his phone rang. It was Claire. Ed, she said breathlessly, you need to check the news or Facebook or just open anything. You and Lily, you're everywhere. He frowned. What are you talking about? The picture, she said. The one I took of Lily and Ranger in the snow. I posted it last night. I didn't think, God, Ed, it's gone viral. Edward didn't have Facebook. He barely knew how to text. But Claire sent him the link, and with the help of a nurse at the clinic, he saw it. It was a photo Claire had taken from across the yard. The tiny figure of Lily in her pink coat, kneeling in the snow, arms wrapped around the dog, covered in her flying horse's blanket. The caption read, A little girl wouldn't let her old K9 freeze alone. This is what real love looks like. The post had thousands of shares, hundreds of comments, offers for donations, and messages from veterans, animal lovers, parents, and people from across the country. Edward sat back in his chair, stunned. "What did you do, Lily?" he whispered. Dr. Rivera appeared at the door, holding a clipboard. "You should see this," she said. She led him to her office, where a computer screen showed her clinic's inbox exploding with messages. Donations were coming in through their emergency fund, enough to cover Ranger's current treatment and more. But that wasn't all. "We had a call this morning," Dr. Rivera said, "from a man named Jacob Holtz. He's a retired officer. Says he used to serve with Ranger." Edward's mouth fell open. Jacob Holtz. That name pulled the pieces past the surface. A flash of desert sand, sirens, chaos, and Ranger lunging to protect a wounded comrade. Jacob had been there. One of the few Edward still remembered with any clarity from his last mission. "He's on his way here," Dr. Rivera continued. Said he hadn't seen Ranger in almost a decade, but he recognized the name when he saw the story. He wants to say goodbye if it's time. Edward felt his throat tighten. "It's not time," he said quietly. "Not yet." An hour later, a black SUV pulled up outside the clinic. A tall man in his 40s stepped out, wearing a navy beanie and a thick coat. His eyes scanned the building with a kind of urgency, and the moment he stepped inside, his gaze went straight to the room where Ranger lay. "Is it really him?" he asked. Lily, who had just finished drawing a second picture, this time of all three of them, nodded and opened the door for him. Jacob stepped into the room, looked down at the dog lying under a soft blanket, and dropped to his knees. "Hey, buddy," he whispered. "You remember me?" Ranger stirred, his ears flicking once. Then, slowly, carefully, his eyes opened, and for the first time since being brought to the clinic, his tail moved, just slightly, but enough. Lily gasped. Jacob smiled through tears. "Yeah, you remember?" Edward stood at the doorway, his heart full of guilt, of healing, of something bigger than either. Lily looked up at her dad. "See," she whispered. "He still has people." Edward nodded. "He always did. I just forgot." But thanks to her, the world remembered. For the next 2 days, Ranger remained under close watch. The clinic staff took turns checking his vitals, adjusting his medications, and making sure he was never alone. But the one constant presence was Lily. She sat beside him through it all, her little fingers gently brushing through his fur, her soft voice reading him stories, telling him jokes only a 6-year-old could invent. Ranger, the weak, responded with a slow blink, a quiet groan, and a faint thump of his tail against the bedding. It was enough. Edward brought food when he could, warm soup in a thermos for Lily, coffee for himself. He stayed longer each time, always sitting quietly, always watching. His heart had softened, but guilt still wrapped itself around his ribs like a tight wire. On the third morning, Dr. Rivera called Edward and Lily into her office. The air was thick with that kind of silence that usually comes before hard decisions. "Ranger's stable," she said, folding her hands over a file. "But he won't stay that way without long-term care. He's going to need daily meds for his joints, a strict diet, warmth always, no stairs, no jumping, no stress." Edward nodded slowly. "And the cost?" She hesitated. "Even with the donations, there's only so much we can stretch. The money is helping now, but Ranger needs more than a rescue story. He needs a plan." Lily leaned forward in her chair, her legs swinging beneath her. "He's coming home with us, right?" Dr. Rivera offered a smile, but her eyes flicked toward Edward. He swallowed. "We want to take him." "We do. But I don't know if I can give him what he needs, not everything." Lily's lip trembled. "But I already promised." A knock interrupted the moment. It was Jacob Holtz, holding a small folder. "I think I can help," he said. Edward turned in surprise. "You've already done so much." Jacob shook his head. "You and Ranger saved my life once. I haven't forgotten, and now I know what he needs." He handed over the folder. Inside was a form, an application for AK-9 Heroes Grant, a program Jacob helped run through a nonprofit for retired service dogs. The grant would cover Ranger's medical expenses for the next year. Full coverage, meds, food, vet visits. I submitted the story already, Jacob said with a half smile. Didn't think you'd mind. Edward's hands trembled as he read the form. You mean we can keep him? Jacob nodded. If you're ready, and if he's ready. Edward looked at Lily, who had already begun bouncing in her chair, eyes wide with hope. But then Dr. Rivera stood and added gently, There's just one more thing. Everyone turned to her. Ranger's recovery depends on peace. He needs a stable, quiet home. No stress. No loud fights. No uncertainty. Edward closed his eyes. Those words hit hard. He hadn't just failed Ranger by leaving him in the snow. He'd let the whole house become colder. Ever since his wife died, there had been arguments, tension, days when Lily barely spoke. He thought he was doing his best, but maybe best wasn't enough anymore. He knelt beside his daughter, looking into her eyes. Lily, he said softly, if Ranger comes home, I need to promise something, too. She tilted her head. What? That I'll be better for him and for you. She wrapped her arms around his neck. You already are. It was the simplest truth, and it shattered whatever was left of Edward's fear. Dr. Rivera smiled. He can go home tomorrow, if he's ready. The next morning, the snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of frozen grass and slush along the sidewalks. Edward parked the truck in front of the clinic. But this time, he wasn't alone in carrying Ranger out. Jacob helped, cradling the dog with care, while Lily opened the back door and fluffed his new bed. Back home, the house felt warmer, whether from the fixed furnace or the energy inside. Edward couldn't tell. Ranger lay down beside the fireplace, blanket tucked beneath him, and let out a deep, content sigh. Lily sat beside him, humming again the same little tune from that night in the snow. Edward didn't sit on the couch. He sat on the floor with them. Together. Spring came quietly that year. The snow melted from the rooftops. The streets cleared, and tiny green buds began pushing through the frostbitten earth. In the small house at the end of Willow Lane, things were changing too, but not in ways you could always see. Ranger was walking again, not far, not fast, and not without effort. But he was walking. Every morning. Lily helped him down the ramp Edward had built at the back door. They'd go as far as the oak tree in the yard, where she'd sit on the swing, and Ranger would rest nearby, nose lifted to catch the breeze. His eyes followed her everywhere now. He didn't need a leash. His loyalty, as always, was stronger than any rope. Edward watched from the porch, coffee in hand, heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. He still woke early, still checked the mail with the same mild precision, still cooked the same bland oatmeal every morning. But inside him, something had shifted, or maybe something had been restored. Ranger hadn't just come back into their lives. He had brought them back to life. One afternoon, as the sun warmed the sidewalk and Lily traced chalk hearts on the driveway, a car pulled up in front of the house. A reporter stepped out, young and smiling, holding a small camera and a notepad. Mr. Fader, she called. Edward stood from the porch, cautious but polite. That's me. I'm from the Guardian Spirit, she said. We're doing a follow-up on the viral story, the one about your daughter and Ranger. People still talk about it. It's become kind of legendary. Edward chuckled. She's just a kid who didn't want her best friend to freeze. The reporter smiled. That's what makes it legendary. With Lily's enthusiastic permission, they filmed a small interview in the backyard. Ranger sat beside her, head resting on her knee, as she told the story from her point of view. Her words were simple but honest. I didn't think, she said, stroking Ranger's ear. I just knew he was sad and cold, and I knew he loved us. And you love him back? The reporter added. Lily nodded. Love means you don't walk away. The clip aired 2 days later. Millions watched the story. It resurfaced in online forums, in classrooms, in church sermons, and at veteran meetings. Letters began arriving in the mail from other children, from former handlers, from people who had lost something and found comfort in what Lily had done. One letter came from a woman in Idaho who wrote, I hadn't spoken to my father in 5 years, but after seeing what your daughter did for your dog, I called him and he cried. Thank you. Another from a retired officer in Florida. I lost my partner in Afghanistan. Seeing Ranger again. I don't know why, but it helped. And one more from a little boy named Noah in Oregon. I'm 6 feet 2 inches, and now I want to be someone who stays just like Lily. Edward read each letter aloud at the table, while Lily cuddled beside him and Ranger slept near the heater. Every night, when Lily knelt beside her bed to pray, she included one new line. Thank you for bringing Ranger home and for making Daddy better. Edward always paused at the door when she said that, not because it made him uncomfortable, but because it made him believe it was true. Time passed, and Ranger grew slower. The years he had spent in service and the cold that nearly took him had left their mark. But Edward no longer feared the day Ranger would leave them because now there would be no regret, only gratitude. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the trees, Edward sat in the grass with Lily leaning against him, Ranger's head resting in her lap. The old dog blinked slowly, content. He's not afraid anymore, Lily said softly. No, Edward agreed. And neither am I. They stayed there as the sky turned orange and purple. A little girl, her father, and a warrior with paws, surrounded by peace. Ranger had once been trained to protect. But in the end, it was he who was protected and loved by the heart that never walked away. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Because sometimes the smallest hands carry the greatest love, and one act of kindness can change a life, even save one.